I'd like to steer your attention to the other side of the panel and turn it over to Brenda.
Thank you. Good afternoon again. As was mentioned, I am an immigration and nationality law attorney. I've been an advocate here in Gwinnett County specifically over a decade. And I'm also here today speaking personally as a U.S. citizen by choice, one that naturalized precisely for my deep love and my desire to uphold our Constitution and our American values, that of freedom, but also of equity and justice. And it is based on also my legal expertise and constituency outreach in this issue that we're discussing that I want to provide in a statement against 287G, precisely to make that based on facts and practical rationales. We all know, history has shown us time and again, that something put into law or policy is not necessarily equivalent to being just or the right thing to do for our society. And we have to keep that in mind. But moving on from that, we have seen study after study, and one from the Immigration Policy Institute that has found that, in fact, Gwinnett has had always a relatively small unauthorized population, actually ranking 28th amongst all counties, yet it's 5th in the number of detainers issued by ICE. This is evidence, one of many evidence, that suggests a disproportionate number of immigrants that are identified and a key indicator of racial profiling. No, it is not difficult to determine who to pull over for no license, and I'll tell you that as an attorney as well, where I consistently received consultations from people that received a citation for driving without a driver's license. It so happened that the only thing that they had to identify him as a potential suspect would be the color of their skin. Now, this issue affects both those with legal immigration status, whether they be permanent residents and U.S. citizens, because they are equally profiled in the same process, just simply they do not receive the citation. So therefore, because we do not track the immigration status of those that we do not ticket, we don't have that information to make a more relevant comparison. It is also, I was living here, and my family was living here between 2009 and 2011 when there was the heaviest enforcement here in Gwinnett County. And I will tell you that there was routinely checkpoints set up in front of businesses that were predominantly either immigrant-owned or immigrant consumers. And also, even on Sundays in places of worship where checkpoints, quote unquote, would be set up and routinely set within these communities. Furthermore, reports will show you that 60% of those jailed, in fact, are for minor traffic violations and not for any other crimes. And we cannot, and we should not continue to link criminal activity with traffic violations, despite the fact that, yes, in Georgia law, criminal violations are under our criminal code. But who here has not received a traffic citation? I would say that's probably only a handful of us. So if we're going to call that the context of being a criminal, then that would subject most of us here today to that terminology. I also don't want us to continue to allow the dehumanizing, as was previously mentioned, of conflating criminal activity with immigration or immigrants generally. And let me remind you again that civil immigration violations are under civil code and not under criminal code. Yes. When we paint a broad brush of all immigrants, or even those that are undocumented, as criminals, I ask you to take a personal consideration, and some of us here on the panel have already mentioned to you. I migrated also to this country when I was 5 years old, and I was without status for many years. It was only because of law signed by President Ronald Reagan that allowed my family and then eventually myself to become a U.S. citizen. That is, in fact, not an option available to all that migrate. But that opportunity has allowed me to become a citizen, but to also have the honor and the privilege to serve not only us Gwinnetians, but to represent us as a state and the values that we can bring and the benefits that we garner the state of Georgia. For the diverse communities in our county, this false rhetoric of stigmatizing and criminalizing the concept of immigration or those that happen to be undocumented is a false rhetoric that I will not and we should not validate. And let's remember that ethnic and racial discrimination is not an equal opinion, and it is not of equal value. I would also like you to consider why it is that we don't have the Gwinnett County Police Department speaking in favor of these programs. I've spoken to numerous police officers that have to go into our communities and have to engage a broad spectrum of our communities. And they have told me over and over again their dislike of having to enforce something that does not keep Gwinnetians under public safety out of fears of concern to cooperate or even to report crimes that equally affect all of us in Gwinnett County, whether we are U.S. citizens or otherwise. Finally, I want to discuss a point about the fiscal irresponsibility of this program. And there are numbers, if you want to look up an excellent report by the Georgia Policy and Budget Institute that actually highlights that Gwinnett County can document that its 287G program costs taxpayers at least $9 million over its 8 years. What could we otherwise do with that money to actually improve and increase the public safety of all Gwinnetians? I want to leave you with a different concern and note aside of the issues with 287G, and that is my deep concern that the Sheriff's Department would invite to speak on their behalf an individual that on this panel, to my personal knowledge, is the only one that's a convicted felon. I will leave that to you to determine. Furthermore, the Southern Poverty Law Center has indicated that his organization is considered a hate group with anti-immigrant and white nationalist ties. And I will leave you with his own words from his blog.
Please let the panelists speak.
His own words from his blog that says, "The march that composed of mostly Hispanic demonstrators, I got the sense that I had left the country of my birth and transported to some Mexican village, taken over by angry, barely restrained mobs. The first act on my safe return home was to take a shower." These are the words of the individual on this panel in his 2010 blog entry.
Thank you.